Bienvenue sur le chemin du Puy. Kate and I walked the route in the fall of 2019 over the course of 5 weeks. So what follows will draw heavily on comparisons between walking in Spain and walking in France. And sometimes Spain will pale in the comparison. If you hear somebody panting on my right, that is not Kate, but my dog Mia, who just doesn't like to be by herself. So put up with her, as I have to do. So Spain will often pale in the comparison with France here, but please don't take that as a negative, because we really love the Spanish Caminos. But there are just some things which I'll focus on today that we really liked a lot in Spain, in France rather. So overall, as Guy said, I'll focus more on what the overall experience is like, the logistics involved. So the beginning will be heavy on narrative, and I'll save the pretty pictures for the last part. And we've also, our Guy's going to post in the chat a little guidebook I wrote up, which contains all the details on logistics that I've covered here. So if there's something that I pass over quickly, you'll find the information there, along with other links that Guy will put in. So plunging right in, let's see, first problem I had with starting out. There we go. And just make sure this works. Good, it works. Okay, so the Via de la Puy Route goes by a lot of different names. You'll see them all used. It's called the Via Podiensis, the Chemin de Saint-Jacques, Chemin de Compostela, or it's mostly referred to as a GR65, which is the official designation of the French National Hiking Association. That stands for Grande Randonnée, meaning big trail. It is 750 kilometers approximately. It's tranquil all the way through. Approximately the length of the Camino Francés. Starts in the vicinity of Lyon, which will be your gateway for getting there, and it ends in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port at the foot of the Pyrenees. But beyond its beauty and the great food and accommodations, which I'll talk about at some length, there's really one thing that made the Puy Route absolutely unique for me, and it's something we never saw in something like 2,500 kilometers on these Spanish Caminos, and that is this, if I can get to it. Okay. Right. It's toilets in the middle of nowhere with toilet paper and clean, and they're everywhere. They're both in the countryside and in virtually every tiny hamlet you'll pass through. So no need to find a bush or a wall in the middle of the Meseta when you need to pee. There's going to be a toilet coming up. In fact, I was so amazed by this phenomenon for the first 2 weeks that I think I took more pictures of toilets than of anything else. But I'll go on with more mundane details. Up. Okay. So we all know that or should know, that the Camino de Santiago is not just a route across northern Spain that winds up in Santiago, but rather a collection of routes into northern Europe. And here we see that network extends through France. You can see the 4 main ones in France outlined in blue there, east and north to Italy, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Germany. So in France itself, there are 4 main Caminos. You see on top on the left, the Tour route, which starts in Paris, goes through Tours. The second one is the Vézelay route. The third is the Via Podiensis, the Puy route, which starts in the Puy. So those 3 all wind up in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Actually, they meet up a little before that. And then the 4th route is the Arles route, which actually goes over a different pass across the Pyrenees and meets the Française around Puente la Reina. Okay, if we focus down on the Puy route, you'll notice something in particular. So in contrast to the other French Caminos, you've probably never heard of any of the towns on the route. You can just see some of them as Stang, Figeac, Cahors, Moissac. In fact, even our French friend Vincent, with whom we walked the first 10 days, had never heard of most of the towns on the route. As he said, we're in deep France, basically in the middle of nowhere. And this fact will inform our experience, as I'll talk about at some length. Historically, Le Puy-en-Velay was actually a pilgrimage destination long before Santiago de Compostela became one. In pre-Christian times, the locals worshipped a great big mysterious stone, kind of shades of Musha, if you've walked out to Finisterre and beyond, on top of the hill that crowns Le Puy. Several centuries later, the Virgin Mary appears. It's a familiar kind of story. There's a woman with a fatal disease. She prays to the Virgin Mary. Mary tells her to climb the hill with the sacred stone to pray some more. The woman does so. Lo and behold, she's cured, goes on to have lots of babies, marries a rich man, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm maybe amplifying the story a little bit here, but that's the basic myth. So the predictable outcome is that the local powers that be build a big church to celebrate the miracle. They encourage the faithful to come to town, spend a lot of money, pay their homage. And that's what happens. They build a great big church up on the top of the hill. You see it here in its present incarnation. You see the door that all pilgrims march out of on their way down into the center of Le Puy and out of town. As I noted on a previous slide, Charlemagne himself made 2 pilgrimages to Le Puy in the 8th century. And in 951, after the establishment of the Camino de Santiago, the Bishop of Le Puy himself paves the way, as it were, to Spain and links the 2 pilgrimage sites. So Le Puy Route has its moment in the sun for several centuries. But unlike the Spanish Caminos, the Le Puy Route and the other French Caminos really fade from history for hundreds of years. They stop being actual pilgrimage routes. In the 1970s, the French National Hiking Association resurrects some approximation of the ancient route as part of a national system of hiking trails, in this case, the so-called GR65. Okay, this is really significant. Because the modern route was created by hiking association rather than pilgrim groups, it is not designed to take you to a specific goal in the most efficient way possible, like the Camino Francés and the other Spanish Caminos, but rather to expose you to the best scenery the region has to offer while passing through the prettiest countryside and towns. Kind of damn be efficient movement. I once Google mapped the best road route from Roncesvalles, the start of the Francés in Spain, to Santiago, and it came up with a road that paralleled almost exactly the Camino Francés and was exactly the same distance. When I did the same for the Le Puy route, it gives you a road route that's like nowhere near the Le Puy route and is about 100 kilometers shorter. So just to illustrate the point, this is not a direct route designed to get you to a specific place in the shortest way possible. So equally important, and again, unlike the Spanish Caminos, the Le Puy route avoids large towns and cities altogether. The 2 largest towns are Le Puy in the beginning and Cahors around the halfway point. They both have less than 20,000 people. There's nothing like León or Bilbao or Burgos or any of the other large cities that are in Spain. There are numerous stretches when you're walking where you go all day, sometimes even several days, without finding a place to, without finding a bar en route in the middle of the day to have a snack. So what does this mean for us? That's what it means. It's serene all the way through. serene, serener, serenest. That's actually, the last one's actually approaching the Pyrenees. And unlike the Spanish Caminos, you'll virtually never, or almost never, be on a road with traffic, even coming into a town. So I think we all have our horrible memories of one town or another that was either terrible to walk into or walk out of. For a lot of people, it's Burgos. We avoided that by taking the river route, but Santander on the Norte was kind of our nightmare of just kind of whatever 15 kilometers of industrial slum. So you don't have that at all. Here's what it's like coming into Cahors, the biggest town on the Puy Route. Totally empty back road descending to Cahors in the distance, which lies at the bottom of the valley. You cross this ancient Roman bridge in the middle of town. You may not have seen anybody for the 10 kilometers approaching Cahors. The next day when you leave, it's the same thing. You cross the river, actually a little bit downstream. You leave by way of this incredible Roman bridge that is now pedestrian only, and immediately you're climbing up the very steep hill that leads you out of Cahors, and you're in the countryside. So there is kind of a downside to such serenity. That is, if you're into, big museums, going to the Guggenheim or spending hours in the Cathedral of Burgos, to give one example, you're not going to find the equivalent on the Puy Route. There's smaller museums, there's gorgeous churches, but mostly you're just going to have to chill on a rest day. So maybe you'll wind up in Lauzert. Oops, went too far. Oops. Okay, gotta go back. Good.
There you go.
So you wind up in downtown Lauzert. You'll find that the most exciting thing to do may be watching the sun's shadow climb up the side of the church. Having trouble here. Another alternative is, kicking back outside your gite in suburban Gréalou. As these slides show, I hope the Puy Route is, above all, a mellow experience which people savor rather than rush through. The people who walk it, especially the French who predominate, they'll walk it for a week, 2 weeks on holiday. There's not that same compulsion. There's not a bed race, not a compulsion to get to a fixed destination where your final reward is a Compostela. By and large, your companions will be walkers rather than pilgrims in the strict religious sense. But even though this is not a pilgrimage trail, though a pilgrimage trail can be obviously what you make it, there's still plenty of St. James statues and reminders that you're on the historical Chemin du Saint-Jacques.
And you do get a Compostela. You do get a passport.
And there's two of the roadside, I don't know what you want to call them.
Evidence.
Okay. Focus a bit on the terrain. So the first part you're going to climb quickly. You're going to spend the first 10 days or so at an altitude of 3,500 to 4,500 feet. It can be cold, especially if it's March, April, or October. It's a lot of climbing in the first part. I would liken it to the Primitivo, the first part of the Norte. There's lots of steep ups and downs. The trail sometimes not smooth at all. One good feature is that the steep ups and downs are usually in the woods, so you're not doing them while baking under the hot sun. The landscape is pretty remote in the first part. It's largely pasturage. Sometimes it just seems completely vacant, as you'll see in some of the slides. After roughly the first 300 kilometers, it descends into the Lot and Selle River valleys. There's still lots of climbs. After Cahors, it flattens out a bit. Grazing gives way to crops. There's more pavement in the second part, but it's always serene. Okay, route marking. It's as good as the Francés or any of the Caminos in Spain. I emphasize the U here because I can get lost while walking my dog around the block. And you'll see that it's always marked with a familiar red and white blaze that you see here. And the great feature that kept saving my bacon is that if you take a wrong turn, there's going to be a red and white X on a tree or a telephone pole after about 100 yards to steer you in the right direction and let you know you've gone astray. And which happened to me a lot because I got my head in the clouds a lot of the time. Okay, next topic on the subject of getting lost, if I can make the mouse work, is guidebooks. Mayam Dodo, nobody knows what it stands for. It's often abbreviated as MMD. It is really the only one worth a damn, and I've looked at a lot of them. People get scared off because it's in French, but it's really, really easy to figure out. It's all symbols, the very few actual French words in there. You can easily look them up on, with Google Translate or something. And I really recommend it above everything else. It's extremely accurate. It's got all the details, all the nitty gritty that you could possibly imagine. And there's nothing like it. When I've looked at other guidebooks, they'll typically say, look at Mayam Dodo for more details. It's revised every year. The prices are accurate, accommodations, and I really urge it upon you. There is an app version in English. It's not quite as complete as the written version, but the app version does have a GPS map, which is more accurate than any of the other GPS tracks that I've seen. And again, I've looked at a bunch of them. Okay, that's what the cover looks like. And I'll give you just one chunk. Mostly I threw away the pages as I walked along to save weight. But for some reason I kept a stray page. So you can see, you can see how, there's a lot of shorthand here. That means, the flag means, they speak English. In the beginning of the guidebook, there are, annotations, so you can figure out all the symbols. That means, for example, oops, keep doing that. That means it's Wi-Fi, they take horses. There's lots of details in here. I mean, you will find a stray French word, linge, for example, but you can look it up in Google Translate. And what does it mean? Laundry costs you €4. It tells you that you can cook for yourself. It tells you the hours that it's open, and also the time of year it's open. So anyway, I really, really urge it. Really urge Mayam Dodo on you. Other resources. The Grons, if you don't know it, I think Guy is putting these links up in the chat. If you don't know Grons, it's kind of the Bible in French. It's in Spain. It's a website. It's not an app, and because it's a website, it can really be kept up to date. I used it a lot because it contains reviews and recommendations on accommodations, so I found that pretty useful. I relied on maps.me for navigating alternatives. Subsequently, I found a great free app called Windy Maps, which you can download, and not only contains the roads, but like every trail in the entire universe. And I found it really user-friendly. I find it useful. A lot of times a very steep descent, for example, and maybe there was a road alternative, which was less of a killer descent on the knees. And, sometimes you want that, or maybe you want to just cut off 3 kilometers because your partner wants to walk 30 kilometers like mine does. And I only want to walk 27 or something. So I do find those useful. The Camino Forum has a sub-forum devoted to Le Puy, and there's also a great Facebook page, the Via Podiensis Facebook page, where you can get answered very quickly to any specific questions you have. Okay, big topic, accommodations. And this, along with food, is really the thing that, for me, distinguished the Puy Route from any of the Spanish Caminos. So I'm not a fan of the albergues in Spain. I avoid them, or I avoid the dorms whenever I'm able to, preferring to stay in private rooms. You know, I find them crowded, noisy. I can't really stand too many bunk beds right on top of me. And they also feel, to me, a little bit commercialized. You line up at the albergue, you pay your money, you pick your bed. It's generally, not always, more of a commercial transaction than a warm welcoming. The feeling in France is really completely different. Large impersonal albergues simply do not exist. More often than not, somebody who looks like Santa Claus or your kindly uncle and aunt are going to greet you when you show up. And instead of asking for your passport and your money, they're going to hand you a cup of tea, or, you know, a cold drink, and want to chat with you, maybe sometimes too much, because all you want to do is take a shower. But nevertheless, it's a totally different greeting than normally I got in Spain. As I wrote here, every night is a Casa da Fernanda night. So in contrast to large impersonal albergues in Spain, the places where you usually stay will be part of someone's house, whether it's a spare bedroom or an addition to the house that they've transformed into a type of albergue. Maybe it's a converted barn or a wing that they've added onto the house. And that's, they call them gites in France instead of albergues. And not only will you be living with your hosts because it's their house, but you're going to share dinner with them. Generally, because many of these places are located in tiny hamlets or in the middle of the countryside where there's no other option to eat. So the Casa da Fernanda, if you've walked the Portuguese, is it's kind of the epitome of the warm, welcoming albergue, where you're literally in Fernanda's home and sharing dinner with her and her husband. And that's kind of the typical night in France. Now there are hotels, but they are only found in the larger towns, and there's simply not a lot of them. So you're going to be relying on, you know, on what are called the gites and the chambre d'hôtes, and those are the two forms of accommodations, and I'll talk about them next. If I can get the slide to move. There we go. Okay, so the gites, limited number of beds. I read somewhere that by law, they're actually limited to 16 beds. Typically in rooms of like 2 to 8 beds, you share a bath, of course. And as I said, they're always accessory to somebody's house. Again, I think this is required by law. Very few bunk beds. You'll hit some. You know, you may have a room with 6 beds. 2 will be there'll be 1 bunk bed and 4 singles. But the norm is single beds. Bottom sheets and blankets are always provided. Cost is somewhat more than France and than Spain, rather. We didn't find any donativos. It's typically 13 to 17 euros per bed. The demi-pension will be your best deal, and that is breakfast and dinner plus your bed. Usually ran 33 to 37 euros per person. As I said, almost all meals communal. There's often no other place to eat. Miam Miam Dodo will list the places that have a cook for yourself option. So that's gites. The other main form of accommodation. Oh, a couple of pictures of gites. The top 2 are in the countryside. The one on the left, the gite part, is to the left. The main house is to the right. The one on the right was a former church that somebody bought and converted into a house for herself, her husband, and 10 or 12 guests. What's that?
And a chapel.
And a chapel, right, where we ate dinner. The one on the bottom is in some small town. I forget exactly which, but basically the top part of the top part of the home was converted into a gite with about 3 bedrooms up there. Couple pictures of what the interiors look like. These are pretty typical. You can see there's sheets, there's blankets. Nobody brings a sleeping bag. You do need a sleep sheet because you won't have a top sheet usually, except in a chambre d'hôte. But in the gites, you'll have a bottom sheet. You'll have a pillow. You'll have blankets. In these few examples, there were roughly 5 beds, pretty spaced out in the rooms. These particular cases, there weren't any bunk beds. Up. A subset of the gites, which is kind of the equivalent of the municipal albergues or the gite communals, and these will be a little bit more impersonal. Typically, the gite keeper won't be living there because he or she will be an employee of the municipality that's running the communal gite. But they are, they can be a little bit more industrial, as you can see by this example. But again, in this place and in other places, we wound up having a room by ourselves. Looks a little industrial, those cots, but we had our own private space. And just because you're in the communal gite, try and go back. So some of the gite, depending on where they are, they'll also offer dinner like this one did. And in this particular case, our host actually did live at the gite communal. He was a volunteer, and the volunteers rotated in living there. He's the 2 gentlemen in the foreground with the gite keepers, as you can see. So that's gites. The other form is a chambre d'hôte, which will be, somewhat more personal. It's literally a guest. It means a guest bedroom in somebody's house. You may or may not have your own bathroom. You may be sharing it with your hosts or with other guests. Typically just 2 or 3 rooms. You'll almost always be eating dinner with your hosts. But instead of, say, 10 or 12 people at the table, as you may find at a gite, there could be just you and mom and pop, as it were, or you, mom and pop, and 2 other guests. So it's a more personal experience. It's not, if you're traveling as a couple or as a pair, it's not necessarily that much more expensive. So a room for 2 will be 40 to 50 euros, which will include breakfast. The demi-pension for 2 will be 70 to 90 euros. So, contrast that with 35 euros a piece in a gite, and you may wind up paying the same. If you're traveling alone, it'll be somewhat more expensive because the room price will be more than half the room price in a, if you're traveling as a couple. And as I noted, the distinction often gets blurred because it's very hard to tell the difference sometimes between a guest bedroom, which and somebody's finished attic, but in general those distinctions hold. So a couple of sides from the chambre d'hôte. This was one in the middle of nowhere. It was literally a farmhouse, though obviously renovated. But it was an active farm. They did have a swimming pool. We were in the middle of October, so unfortunately it was closed, but we did have the company of the very fierce, enormous French dog. So that was nice. And this was another one. This is actually the place run by that couple that I labeled kindly uncle and aunt. So that was our bedroom on the left, which was very comfy, and it had its own bath. And there on the right was the living room, dining room, where we ate dinner with the family, just us and them. Okay, one other great thing about France is that basically, that's it. Basically, you don't have to worry about bed bugs. You see this sign all over. In English, it means I don't walk with bed bugs. Probably because you're in somebody's house or part of somebody's house. They're very, very proactive about bed bugs. In fact, it's rare that you can take your pack into the room. You got to leave it outside in some kind of anteroom, sometimes literally outside, and you just take inside whatever you need for the evening. And that kind of feels weird the first time you do it, but very quickly you get used to doing that, and you really appreciate it. Okay, let me catch up with my notes here. Okay, so related obviously to the accommodations is the food, which you'll be eating usually at the place where you'll be staying. So in the guidebook, I think Guy attached it to the, that I wrote, I think Guy attached it or put it in the chat. I described the 3-course Spanish pilgrim meal as mystery meat served up by a surly galley slave. Now, that may be a bit of an overstatement, at least the galley slave part. But one thing is certain in France, you're not going to be eating an industrial meal that's coming out of the freezer. Instead, your vegetables will generally come from the garden outside. And that delicious pâté you'll be scarfing down was probably made from a duck who is alive and quacking at yesterday's guests. It's that fresh. And the meal will be served by your host or hostess who will be eating with you and whose whole life revolves around pleasing his or her guests. As I wrote in that guidebook, to compare a French dinner at a gîte or chambre d'hôte to a Spanish pilgrim meal is like comparing dinner with Alice Waters to dinner at Denny's. Words fail. So one extra thing, French meals always consist of multiple courses, so you're going to find something to eat. If you're a vegetarian, or worse, you're a vegan or some such strange beast. And if you're even weirder, like Kate, they'll go out of your way to accommodate you. Kate, for example, only eats 2 things in the entire world: plain omelets and undressed lettuce, plus chocolate. But if I called in advance and alerted them of the food issues, they would inevitably accommodate us and would have an omelet waiting for Kate. So the food, if you do have food issues, they're really good, and they really work hard at accommodating, you know, whatever your palate is. Okay, a lot of people have asked about reservations and to wing it or to reserve. And we generally reserve the day in advance because the reason we did that is that they're cooking for you, and they need to know how many to cook for. As I said, dinner is not coming out of the freezer. They're making it special for you. And also because you're staying in somebody's house, and it just kind of feels a little rude to just go walking up to the door and knocking without announcing you're coming. So generally a day in advance is fine. Sometimes we call, that morning. A couple of times we winged it, but that was typically in places in larger towns where we knew there were other places to eat and where there were, a surfeit of accommodations. Reserve by phone or email works too. If you don't speak French, Google Translate works great. Just, type into Google Translate, do you have a room or 2 beds available tomorrow night? And, it'll translate it for you. And, that works fine. A lot of people relied on that. You can't rely on booking.com. The gites and chambre d'hôtes, by and large, are not reservable on booking.com or any of the booking sites. So calling them in advance is a way to go. Many of the French reserve months and months in advance. We didn't find that necessary, even as in the very beginning, as I'll mention later, there were a group of 6 of us walking together, and we never had problems finding a place, just calling the night before to accommodate the 6 of us. We got a SIM card. You can, of course, use WhatsApp or something like that, but I found the SIM card, to be best, made it easier to make phone calls. the places that speak English, and a fair number of them will speak English or some form of English, and they're noted in Mayam Dodo, as I said before. So if you have more questions on reservations, bring that up later, please. There's also baggage and personal transport. We didn't use it, but it's just like the Spanish Caminos. It's very, very reliable, very efficient. A lot of the French did. A lot of the people we walked with did. They're the two companies. I think Guy again is posting the names in the chat. It's a little bit more expensive than in Spain. It's about €8 a bag. And like in Spain, you can do it either on an ad hoc basis, just day by day by filling out the little form. They'll pick up everywhere, including the gite communal. You can do it either ad hoc or you can reserve for the whole thing. Again, more details in Mayam Dodo. One other thing to note, because you're not walking along the axis of transportation, like you are in Spain usually, local bus routes may not necessarily take you to the next town. So these baggage transport companies, you can also use them if you need to hop back or to hop forward or to hop to a town with a train that'll take you back to Paris. So it's another useful feature of them. Okay, getting there, Lyon's your gateway. You've got to get to Lyon. You can either fly to Lyon, stopping somewhere else, or you can fly to Paris and pick up the train to Lyon. There's a train station right at the Paris airport. We did that, where you can pick up the fast train, or you can get you can stay overnight in Paris and pick up the train in the center of Paris. From Lyon, there's fast local trains. It's roughly an hour and a half. Hour and a half ride to Le Puy, and they're pretty frequent, like every hour or so. Okay, May, June, September are the busiest months. It is hotter than hell in summer, and it's colder than whatever the opposite of hell is in winter. A lot of the places will be closed down, even beginning in mid-October. Certainly by the beginning of November, a lot of places will close down and won't reopen till March, sometimes in March. So you're kind of limited to the spring, summer, and fall months. We started the end of September 21st. We got to Saint-Jean on October 25th, and that worked out pretty well. It wasn't too hot. Places were still open, though some,
one or two.
some were closing down on the latter stages, but by and large it worked well for us. Okay, one last topic, and it is a big one, and that's why I've left it for last. Let me scroll forward here to find my notes. Okay, so this is going to be bad news for a lot of people, and we just have to confront it. So this is going to be a French Camino more than an international one. Maybe 90% of the people you meet are going to be French, especially in the first half, which is probably the most scenic. And if there is a people more averse to learning a foreign language than we Americans are, it's the French. So often you won't find, a lot of French spoken even where you're staying. There are no big towns. You're not going through Paris where, everybody knows enough English to deal with the hordes of tourists. So after the first half, I found that we met a lot more hikers who were going all the way through. It was more of an international mix. So we did meet, more Americans, Australians, English, other English speakers. And of course, all the way through, you'll meet French who will know some English, but it is going to be useful to learn some French, at least some travelers French. So you can muck through. But having said that, we met plenty of people who didn't know any French whatsoever, and they made it. But it will be different. There'll be the same camaraderie of the trail, that you find in the Spanish Caminos. You'll recognize the people, you'll form small groups, but dinners sometimes you're just gonna glom onto the only English speaker because there's going to be a lot of the people at the table that you're not going to be able to speak to. But having said that, you muck through. You form connections even with the people that you're talking with in sign language or with the few words of French and English that the two of you share. So it's a barrier, but it's something that can be in our case was overcome. Okay, I'm going to switch over at this point and go through a bunch more pictures. Kate's helping me here.
New share.
Okay, let's see if this goes forward.
It will if you do that.
Okay, so this is looking out on, this is the day we arrived in Le Puy, and
This is where we start.
this is looking out on the town from the gate or from the main entrance of the cathedral. And we assumed, of course, that all these people had turned out to greet us and wish us bon chemin. We were wrong, as it turned out. It was the annual Renaissance Festival, which was kind of a lot of fun. It did make finding a place to stay rather hard. It was the only difficult time we had the entire trip. So we actually had to hit Le Puy on the fly, and we stayed about 10 kilometers past Le Puy in our first gite. But Le Puy is a cute little town, and unfortunately, they didn't turn out for us, but to see all the festivities that were happening. First road sign, only 1,500 and some odd kilometers to Santiago, which of course is not called Santiago in France. So this was on our first day, and just it's not a particularly brilliant picture, but I kept it in because it illustrates one thing about France that I found interesting. So Kate walking out of that cute little chapel. And so in France, the chapels are open all the time, unlike Spain. And I found that kind of ironic because, it's not the kind of, I don't know, authentic, quote unquote, whatever that means, pilgrimage trail such as, the Camino Francés continues to be. But the churches were open. So if you like to pray and you want a place to pray, you can stop in and pray. In France, in Spain, that's often difficult to do. I mean, I'm not particularly religious myself, but I just appreciated the fact that they were open. So when it was raining, I could literally take shelter from the storm, which was much harder to do in Spain, both literally or figuratively. Just some countryside. So this shows you, the first slides are, I'm going in order here. So this is from the first part, a day or two into it, you get a sense of what's here, a very rocky, hilly landscape that you're climbing up and down. So I haven't talked about this, but in the beginning, we were accompanied by friends that we had met on the Via Francigena the year before in Italy. And that's Vincent on the left, he's French. And his sometime Italian girlfriend, Renata, in red is on the right. That's Kate in the background. And Renata's two kids in the center. They became an item on the Via Francigena and accompanied us for the first 10 days on the, on the Puy Route until they had to go to work. And their kids were with us for part of that time, but they too eventually had to go off to work. So the first week and a half, we were with them, with company, and after that, we were on our own.
French-speaking company.
And it was, of course, useful to have Vincent, who helped tutor me, help bring back my my high school and college French, and tutored me in every day while we were there. Again, you get a sense of the rocky landscape. Going through the woods. So you see a lot of these strange, I don't know what in the world this was. I can't figure it out. It's obviously got the scallop shell on it, commemorated something, I don't know what. Here's a close-up of a chipmunk there. I don't know what he's doing. Here's a photo of Vincent with me and Kate, and we got more scallop shells and an owl. And again, the symbolism escapes me, but it was kind of fun. French cow, there are lots of them, especially in the first part. Get a sense of the openness, the barrenness of the landscape in the first part.
Yeah.
Church, just in the middle of nowhere. Now, next to toilets, I think the picture that I took most of was Kate's back disappearing down the trail. That's one of them. We'll see a lot of Kate's back disappearing down the trail. Kind of, as you can see, rocky, it's steep uphill in this section here, but again, shaded. I'll just zoom through these.
We did have more sunny days than it looks like.
So this is one of the first towns you come to. It's a little town, Saint-Côme-d'Olt is the name I recall. And they all look like this. It's just incredible. You just don't find ugly towns. And I don't know if ugly towns simply don't exist in France or the creators of this route just managed to avoid them, but they all literally look like this. And here's a different town, and that's what it looks like coming into it. Espalion, I think it was. That's a cathedral in Espalion. It's actually a bigger town. And as you note, the front door is open. We did have some sunny days. Another cute town further along. It still remains hilly. The towns tended to be in the valleys, so you'd climb down into them. And of course, the next morning you'd climb out of them. Which was inconvenient sometimes, but better to climb in the morning than to climb late in the afternoon. Countryside. Weird marker, the shoes of Saint-Jacques, with Santiago only 1,450 kilometers away. Okay, I'm going to dwell on this for a minute. What you're seeing here is metropolitan Espalion. Its current population of the entire metropolitan area is 240 people. See the church in the center, looks like a sleepy town to all appearances. Nothing of any historical significance has happened in Espalion in about 2 millennia. And then you get to the center of Espalion, where that church is, the base of that church. And that's what you see. It's a monument to the dead in World War I. There are 19 names on that. And that's a lot for a town of 240. But that's only one face. There's another 19, another 19. And then on the last face is only 18, perhaps because the war ended in November. Walking through Central Europe, it's just full of reminders like that. And just kind of brings you up short. Even Vincent. So the next day we hit Conques. Conques is one of the super cute towns. A lot of people choose to take a day off in Conques. It's roughly 220 kilometers, somewhat less than a third of your way into the walk. We were walking super fast because we were accompanied by those 20 somethings, and we got to Conk in 8.5 days. Most people do it in 10. I don't recommend 8.5. You can see again, it's a very steep climb down into it. It's a steep climb out of it. There's the central cathedral. There's the interior. Every night at 9:30, there's a great organ contest. Concert. And of course, I missed it because I fell asleep at 9. So it's supposed to be great. And that's the rest of Conk.
We stayed at the monastery.
Yeah, we stayed at the monastery there, attached to the church, and that's climbing out of Conk. It was more rugged than most days, but you know, it's not impossible. It's you know, the kind of trail that you don't find in Spain that much.
Short and gruesome.
Yeah, it was short and gruesome, as Kate just said. Okay. Figeac chapel, a chapel in the main cathedral in Figeac. Main downtown. Figeac's probably the first town of any size, maybe 10,000 people that you come to. This was, I took a picture because of all the braziers hanging there. It was Breast Cancer Awareness Week, as I learned later. Another war monument. Reminder that we're on the Chemin de Saint-Jacques. This is Roquemondor. We took our one and only off day at Figeac. Roquemondor is a medieval fortress town built into the side of the cliff, and it's about a half-an-hour train ride from Figeac. So when we took a day off to go and explore it, it was definitely worth the time.
Half-an-hour train ride and a couple hours walk.
So that's downtown Figeac. Just a little roadside rest stop. So these three guys seem like three cute French peasants to me. And I thought, wow, how quaint. They were working on repairing the walls, as were a lot of their countrymen. I thought, yes, this is really quaint. I'm going to take their pictures. So in my best French, I asked the guy in the middle, je peux faire votre photo? And in this incredibly high class Oxford English accent, he came back to me with, would you prefer if we spoke English? So he and his buddy on the left were in fact retired Oxford dons who had bought houses in the countryside in the south of France. And they were spending their retirement there. The guy on the right may or may not have been an authentic French peasant, or perhaps he was the leading banker in town. I don't know, but it kind of taught me never assume. Okay, I'll zoom through the rest of these so we can leave a little time over for questions. Cathedral Tower, the biggest town. Outside our gites. Kate's back. You can see the countryside is it's turning more into arable land, cultivated land. It's mid-October at this point, or early October, so this field's been harvested already. Lots of fierce dogs in France. This is the Cloister in Moissac. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You'll undoubtedly learn about it when you're there. It's, you know, certainly worth an hour of your time when you pass through Moissac. Again, Breast Cancer Awareness Week. So after roughly 400 kilometers, this was a first flat stretch along the canal leading out of Moissac. We were happy not to be in the hills for 8 or 10 kilometers, but simple solution. Okay, so this is a town you just want to wrap up and take home with you. There's downtown. Our gite is a building on the right.
Yeah, it's a market,
There's a
actually.
market right in the middle of town. It's a view from my window. Yes, that's a nuclear power plant in the background.
The most charming town in France.
France gets like 50% of its power from nuclear power plants. Okay, generally it's clean. Thank you for the bathrooms, but you do find things like this, warning to certain pilgrims. Our countryside is not a garbage pail. Thank you. Generally, there was no bed race. We didn't get up at dawn. I mean, not generally, there is no bed race, period. So there's no need to get up at dawn. We never did, except for 1 or 2 days in late October when we hit a hot spell, mid-October, where it's in the 80s every day. And so we wanted to get out walking before, before the real heat of the day set in. And this is one of those days. Another fierce dog. That's Condom, the cathedral. You'll see a lot more Gothic cathedrals in churches in France than you do in Spain, if you're, if you're into the architecture. So there are 4 musketeers. I always thought there are 3, but there are 4, and they came from Condom, and there they are. It's just kind of an anomalous young woman on a horse, so I took her picture.
Texting,
yeah.
texting while riding.
Kate's back. More of Kate's back. So this is one. This was one curious thing. Along with toilets everywhere, you find these kind of roadside shelters. I don't know what to label them. They're little campgrounds where you can stay. There's nobody monitoring them. And like this one, it had a bed. It had sheets provided. And they're scattered around, and very welcoming thing. That's just the outside view of a picnic table. And I guess somebody comes in the morning and changes the bed and leaves some snacks out, and you leave a donativo or whatever whatever you can spare. So it was a nice feature. Corn being harvested, getting somewhat near Saint-Jean. More cows. Another fierce dog. That's Kate at the swimming pool. This is another one of those roadside resting places. So somebody had laid out hot tea for us. It was pretty cold that morning, as I recall, and also some biscuits. So, really sweet. Leave a few euros in the donation jar. Donkeys, cute house. St. James. It's a town of Navarrenx. I don't know what these 2 guys are about. It's a wall town. A lot of people actually start the Francés here because it's about 3 days shy of Saint-Jean, and it gives you a nice warm up before you tackle that first horrible hill out of Saint-Jean to Roncesvalles. First view of the Pyrenees. First sheep. You're in the Basque country. Pyrenees getting closer. This is the morning of the day where we actually arrived in Saint-Jean. Chapel on that last day. Entrance to Saint-Jean. It's October 25th. Kate walking down the street, the main street in Saint-Jean. She's pointing to the pilgrim's office. And so we went in, we got our last stamp there, of course. And in contrast to the scene you've probably all experienced, the pilgrim office was empty. It was just us and the volunteer there. And we had a nice chat for about 15 minutes with nobody interrupting us. The route out of Saint-Jean. Next day we went to Biarritz. It was 87 degrees on October 26th, and we spent the day doing absolutely nothing, which was wonderful. Next day we went up to Paris, met up with our friend Vincent. It was 47 instead of 87, but it was fun to have a few days in Paris. And finally back here with man's best friend.